Good afternoon, good evening. We're going to give everybody just a few minutes to log in here. I know it can take a couple minutes for everybody to get onto the Zoom. So while we're waiting for those of us that are on, just go ahead and find your Q&A section while we're waiting here. Should be along your upper or lower panel, that Q&A section. You can type in any questions that you might have during the webinar. We'll have a Q&A section at the end. We'll always save time for that. And in the meantime, whoever's logged in on that Q&A, let us know if you've been to Belize before or if you have any plans on visiting this year. And we'll just give it a little bit more time here. Folks are trickling in. All right. All right, here we are. We're past that minute mark, so I think everybody should be logged in. My name is Katie Ejikeme. I'm joining today with Joe Nagel. We're going to be going over Belize 101. I made my way down to Belize for the first time 7 years ago, came here on vacation, fell in love with the place, and this is a story that you'll probably hear over and over again when you come and visit. You just fell in love with the place and you kept coming back, and I truly did. And then I ended up making this my home 5 years ago. So I relocated to Belize. Now I'm a permanent resident here. I live on the island Ambergris Caye. In today's presentation, we will be going over the island as well as the mainland. But if you do want to come down and visit, I'm more than happy to meet up with anybody here in Ambergris Caye. And I'll go ahead and let Joe introduce himself before we jump into the slides.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you everyone again for joining. I think we've got a very exciting webinar today. Last time I was here with Jake talking about Nicaragua. Today we're talking with Katie about Belize. So very exciting to talk about it. As Katie said, I have been around ECI for 5 years now. Belize is one of my favorite places. My father's been working in Belize almost since they gained independence, and actually have my Belizean citizenship. So I think for the first probably 20 plus years of my life, Belize was like my vacation destination while my dad did some work. But ever since I've graduated school, I've been spending a lot of time working with the company from various things such as sales. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about what we've got going on and how we could potentially help you. But Katie, why don't you start us off? Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we had a few more people trickle in since we got started. So
Yeah,
I
it
just
looks
want
like a
to
mixed bag. I see we got some people that are in Belize, some people that have been, some people that haven't been. So it seems like a nice dynamic of people all across the board here.
Awesome. So we'll be able to share some really good information for folks today. So on the webinar today, we're just going to be going over the basics of Belize, share some properties at the end. We'll also have some information about how you can invest in Belize as well as residency options. And again, save some time for that Q&A section. So here, a tiny little country of Belize. It's about the size of Massachusetts. So for folks that have been here before, you probably know how easy it is to access the country. For those of you interested in visiting, just know that there really is a lot of nonstop flights that are added during our high season. But really a flight into Belize is about 2.5 hours from Houston or even Miami. But this small little country right here on the Caribbean coast, we'll go over the mainland today as well as little island Ambergris Caye. But Belize, like I was saying, is about the size of Massachusetts. Our population right now is about 418,000. When I moved here a few years ago, we were much lower than that. So it really does show the amount of folks that are relocating into the region. So over here on this map, you can see what I was referring to. This tiny little island right here is Ambergris Caye. This island is pretty incredible. It's one of the top destinations when folks do come to visit. One of the reasons why people make it down to Belize and find it so easy to visit is not only the proximity, but also with the language. English is the official language. They teach English in schools as well as Spanish, but it's really easy to shop, go around, and travel throughout the country because we speak a similar language. In the homes, you will find a lot of folks do speak Spanish and Creole, but again, one of those countries where it's easy to get around. Also, our US dollar is pegged 2 to 1 with the Belize dollar. So really easy. You can come into the country, spend your US dollars. You don't have to convert it into Belize. So here's those direct flights that I was referring to earlier with the location of Belize right here. So easy to access. I know year round, we do have these nonstop flights even from Canada. A recent one that was just added was the North Carolina on JetBlue. So there's a nonstop flight in from Charlotte right here, as well as New York. So a lot of these destinations, when we see this happening, we know the numbers are coming to the country. So we have major US airlines adding nonstop flights into the country. And as we'll see later on in our slides, we also have branded hotels that are taking note of that and also moving into the country. One of the great things about Belize, besides the location and the language, is also the community and the culture. So when I came down to Belize my first time, all I could say was the people make it what it is. And I hear that over and over again when I'm talking to visitors. Really, it's so friendly. I mean, Joe and I, we've traveled throughout Central America for work with ECI, and we can pretty much say that the Caribbean is a really friendly, or even Central America is a really friendly location. But there's something really unique about Belize when you come here. I always like to say that if you ask somebody where something is, they're more likely to show you than tell you. If you're sitting by yourself eating your lunch alone, they're more likely going to invite you over rather than just have you sit there by yourself. Everybody will really welcome you into their circle. The other great thing is there's a lot to do here in Belize. I know for a long time the country was really a small fishing village here on the coastal areas, but then we also were focusing on our diving, snorkeling, and fishing. And now we have a lot of other sports, adventure sports that are bringing people in, as well as the mainstream traveler. The cuisine is another one that brings people in, delicious fresh foods. And then when you come here, it's really easy to get around with your family. So now we're a mainstream travel destination for the whole family to come and enjoy. This right here, I always like to highlight this. This is a small little island. If you can see my cursor down on the left-hand side of that screen, that is Caye Caulker. So when you come into Belize, not only is it easy to come over to the islands and explore Ambergris Caye, but you're about a 30-minute boat ride away from other little islands that you can puddle jumper around to. Again, diving was one of the main draws for tourism here in Belize. We not only have the largest living barrier reef, so I say largest living because I know ours is the second largest in the world, but the one in Australia is having some issues. So ours truly is the largest living barrier reef. And so that brings a lot of divers in. You can come and get certified. We also have the Blue Hole. If you're not into diving, the Blue Hole, you can also take the little puddle jumper. I just had some clients down. They said that was a must do. It took them about an hour to get there or round trip on the puddle jumper, but that's when they were able to get that really incredible view. So even if you're not a diver, you can still enjoy some of our diving expeditions there. On the mainland, you have the jungle feel, so you can go zip lining. We also have a lot of the trails, and one that I really highly recommend is called the ATM Cave Tours. So the ATM Cave Tours, you can see this group right here. It's one of those adventure sports where you don't have to, be into the adrenaline rush. You can still get out and enjoy nature, but you do tube through this cave right here. So it's pretty incredible. It's a nice, event for the whole family to enjoy. So I know we were talking about, what brings people to Belize, how to get here, and then Joe's going to jump in and talk a little bit about the past.
Yep. And before I do, I will mention the ATM caves is a blast, and you do a little bit of actual climbing and various things like swimming through the caves. If that's a little too adventurous for you, they have just cave tubing, which is absolute a joy. You just sit in those inner tubes and float down the river there. So definitely a lot of great activities depending on how adventurous you are and kind of what you're looking to do. But yeah, as Katie said, historically, Belize was an ancient Mayan society. So for those of you kind of scratching your head, well, I don't remember learning about Belize. It was formerly known as British Honduras, but prior to that, it was centered in the Mayan. And so notably, you can see a lot of great Mayan ruins for various activities. Katie mentioned the ATM caves, which was Mayan, but you've got other ones, various ruins like you can see here. I don't know exactly which one that is, but Zuna Tunich, Altun Ha, there's a ton of great ones. Very cool to see, and just a short flight away from the US. So that's how Belize started. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see it transitioned. Quite interesting history here. Before it became Belize, which it is today, it was known as British Honduras. And that was because both the British and the Spanish were trying to lay claim to it, but ultimately it led to a battle of St. George's Caye in 1798, where the British won that one, and so that's why you see the English speaking. That's why you see the ties to England and whatnot. So kind of interesting history there. That's a great excuse, and I know we'll talk about it a little bit later, but a great excuse to come down. The Battle of St. George's Caye is actually a holiday. It's September 10th, and then there's also the Independence Day celebrated September 21st. So some good holidays in September to come down and check things out. But if we move on from this slide, but all in all, it leads to a really diverse population. So when you get to Belize, you'll walk around, you'll see some Mayan folks, you'll see some Mennonites, you see all different types of people, and it really is interesting how they all culminate together. You see people speaking English, which is the main language, as Katie mentioned, but you also see Creole and stuff like that. But over 80% of the population is bilingual. I must say I don't know Spanish. I unfortunately learned French in school, which has not been very helpful for my day in day out job. And I can certainly get by with no problems in Belize because everyone speaks English. So whether you're asking for directions or whatnot, there's always someone who can help you out. So a very cool society there. But I think another really important aspect about its former history is just once Belize did gain independence from Britain, it allowed them to exploit three key strategic advantages. And the big one is the legal system. And not to bore people and go into depths, but Belize is a British common law country. And so from a legal perspective, it's very similar to those of you that are from the US on this. There's other countries that we operate in that are civil law. Civil law is very, very direct. It just, here's the law, and then people just say, is it that or not? Whereas, common law is what we're used to in the US. So you've kind of got like the prehistoric judgments and how those played. So that was big. The location, being so close to the US and Canada, allows for great trade and a lot of great things like nowadays with tourism, how important that is to the country. And then the language. I mean, the language allows for so much more business to come in because, a lot of the world's business is conducted in English. So, that's strategic. I've seen since I've been around Belize, things like call centers. I know people always associate call centers with, scam calls, but, it is a part of society in Belize because all the folks are English speakers. They can get those kind of jobs, which might be better than they might have otherwise. So, and then with that is the Companies Act of 1990. That was created, which has done a lot for the country in terms of the financial sector. So any of you who might be looking at property, this is a really good country, but then also from the financial side, there's a lot of things, which on the next slide, we can talk about things like trusts, if you're looking at asset protection, also things like IBCs. So it's becoming quite a powerhouse. I mean, Belize isn't as old as some of these other countries. Maybe, you've heard about like Cook Islands, you've heard about things like the Cayman Islands, but Belize is really up there when it comes to asset protection. So not my area of expertise, but I see, a lot of clients coming for that reason. And then once they have these kind of structures, they like to put in property, rental kind of property. So, it's really a great part of its economy because some countries don't have these kind of financial powerhouses, which doesn't help in that regard. So if we move on, but yeah, so from a business perspective, growing economy, which is always important to see. I mentioned how, the population is created from a lot of Mennonites. They do a lot of producing from food standpoint, which is, I think, always beneficial when looking at another country. It's not just some island in the middle of the water that can't grow anything. So I think that's important personally. Maybe it is for some of you guys on the call, but so growing economy is great. Affordable real estate, which we'll touch in a few slides. And banking laws. So because, when they gained their independence, they didn't have to follow anyone's specific how to and what to do regulations. So they just came up with their own. They set forward, they saw what was working around the world and they implemented those. But, strong secrecy laws, strong asset protection laws. So if you're kind of looking just beyond the property standpoint, I think there's some really, really good opportunity for folks when looking at Belize.
And some low taxes too. There's 0% capital gains tax.
Yep.
And extremely low property tax. I think the property tax is about 1% of the undeveloped land, and not even the time that you buy it, time that it was surveyed. So all of that has done really well for the business reasons.
Sometimes it's hard to imagine when you see property taxes in the US and it's like, it seems like it's 1% every second you breathe. But yeah, that element really helps when it comes to real estate. So, but it is a Commonwealth country. So while they are independent, there is still strong ties to the UK. You'll see I guess now the king, though I haven't seen any money with the king on it yet, but all the former money with the queen on it. So you'll see those kind of ties, even though they are separated now that they're independent, there's still a strong tie there between them. So interesting dynamic. You saw some people, they're happy they're independent, but then the queen dies and, everyone's very sad. So, but I think a lot of these help lead to, why owning property in Belize right now. And if you go to the next slide, we have a nice little picture for folks, and was talking about on our webinar a couple weeks ago about Nicaragua. So this curve is really important and I think interesting for a lot of folks. But you have all these different places, and this curve kind of shows you, like, Cayman Islands is a very, very beautiful place. It has a lot of great rental income, but you pay for those kind of things. I mean, that's an established market. It's much further along in that regard. So you're going to pay for that. Whereas on the counter side, you see places like Honduras, which, are not the place people are going to a honeymoon anytime soon right now. And therefore the prices are a lot lower, but you're not getting that kind of cash flow on a monthly basis and whatnot. So Belize is kind of this interesting point on the curve. It's not quite as developed as the Cayman, but it's much further ahead than a place like Honduras. So you can get some real good value out of your dollar, which we'll show some examples here in a little bit. But yeah, it's an interesting time to get in. Mike, I know, always talks about it being like a time machine for Key West 20 years ago. And I think, you see that with the increased airlift Katie mentioned, also the brands that we'll talk about with what we've got going on. So really an interesting time to be looking at Belize, I think. So you guys are all very proactive in that regard.
Yeah, and living here and seeing things firsthand over the past 5 years, I really have seen a lot of folks benefit from appreciation. It seems like it's at a really sweet spot where the cash flow is here for tourism, but also growing with that. But the one major benefit where it's not saturated, like maybe Costa Rica on the Pacific coast, is really appreciation.
Yeah, and I mean, we don't need that slide anymore, but El Salvador was, if you think about El Salvador a couple of years ago, that probably would have been as close to the bottom as possible. But, we've seen a real big resurgence in interest in El Salvador with, the crypto policies, the combating all the crime going on there. So, it's the countries do shift along that curve. So it's not to say that, they'll be at the bottom forever. So it's cool to see, but yeah, it's a good time, I think, for a lot of folks to be considering Belize because it's right in that middle spot there. So, but yeah, what we're going to talk a lot about is Ambergris Caye. A lot of people say, but isn't that just a little peninsula from Mexico? No, there is a little actual dugout space that acts as the border, but yeah, it's up north at the top of the island. So it is truly an island, and it is part of Belize. So very different than when you cross, and you can't really cross. I mean, maybe you can via boat, but it's very different from Mexico.
Yeah, I was just up there on a boat the other day. There is a little mangrove river. It's not really a river, but yeah, I call it a mangrove river. You can see the Mexico Coast Guard, so we're very much an island nowadays. But there's a little museum at the northern end of the island, which is really interesting to go in. They talk a lot about the Mayan trade and how this island really was a central point for the Mayans to come to the coast and do their trade. And we still see that history here today, like you had mentioned before.
Yeah, and I think if you're looking at property from potentially an investment perspective, I think there are some places throughout Belize that are certainly interesting, but Ambergris Caye is where almost the majority, if not all, of the tourism revenue comes from. So when you start looking at some numbers, I mean, it's staggering. I mean, it's where the reef is. Most places on the island, you can actually see the crests of the waves crashing into the reef. So close proximity to that, it's the beautiful crystal clear blue water. It's really where, when you ask people, well, where have you been in Belize? Typically it tends to be the island, or usually in the city, because that's where the cruise port is. That said, I wouldn't necessarily recommend spending as much time in Belize City because it's not anything special. Business can be done there, but it's not like a big tourism place in that regard. There are some ruins close to the city, but really what people do when they come to Belize is come out to the islands, do their scuba diving, their snorkeling, visit things like the Blue Hole and whatnot. So, but yeah, that's where most of the tourism comes from. So
I'm right here with this star as Belize City. So you will fly into Belize City in the international airport when you come in to visit, and then you can take your little puddle jumper or a water taxi over to the island. I just want to jump back on this slide because I like to show folks this right here along the coast of Ambergris Caye. That is the reef. So you can truly see it on a map. It drops off to the deep blue right beyond that reef. But inside we get that beautiful blue azul water that we all love to see in the Caribbean because it's so shallow. But when you'd visit other areas of the mainland, it is much further boat ride. So if you want to come and snorkel, dive, go to Hol Chan or Shark Ray Alley, a lot of folks will come out to Ambergris Caye. So they fly out here, they stay on the island, and then they'll do a day trip back into to the mainland to do the Mayan ruins or the ATM cave tours, but they might not necessarily stay there. So when you're looking for a place to invest in Belize, that's why the island, we're going to focus on that, because most folks do make this their home base and then they bounce around. Being such a small country, it's pretty easy to do a lot of day trips, make the island your home base, and then jump over to the mainland.
Yeah, and I
Sorry.
think when I've gone via car from Belize City out to the Guatemalan border, it's maybe, I don't know, 3 hours or so. So even though it looks like this big country, in reality, it's really not that far across. So yeah, but Ambergris Caye is really the main place for a lot of folks because of fishing, snorkeling, scuba diving, all that stuff, right along the reef, which it's the closest place to it. So
just like we were talking about.
yeah, exactly. I mean, beautiful beaches, great amenities. I mean, obviously I don't want to say we're biased, but if you look at a place like TripAdvisor, Traveler's Choice, like all these kind of things, I mean, there are these third-party sites where people's reviews are aggregated and they can make the determination, what places people should visit. Ambergris Caye makes that. This was a certain year, but yeah, I'm sure it's up there still, but it's got a lot of great things for people to come check out. So highly would recommend it. And like I said, it's not just us saying it, you're seeing it from people's reviews out there.
Yes, absolutely. And just definitely for the recreation, I think is why folks come here,
Yeah. Fly fishers, a lot of fly fishers come down. But I actually, when I got my scuba diving license way back when, I learned to do it in Belize. It's great because you got the really shallow waters. Obviously it does have some more experienced spots if you like to go down 100 plus feet, especially the blue hole. But for those beginners, if it's something you've wanted to do, you can do it in the really, really shallow waters, super clear, easy to see. So there's not as much stress when learning there. So
and warm. The waters are warm. I just had a client in and they talked about getting certified in some of the lakes, and I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds so cold. So here the water's pretty warm year round.
Well, and that turtle photo, I would highly recommend whether you scuba dive or snorkel. Seeing those turtles is always such a joy. They're so cute. They just sit there and they eat the little seagrass at the bottom. But highly recommend if you think scuba diving is too overwhelming, the snorkeling. You can see there in that photo, she's maybe swimming in like 10 feet of water. So it's really not that deep, great visibility. So, but the turtles is definitely a must if you like the water and like to get out on a boat. So
Yeah, a lot of wildlife to see over at Holchan Marine Reserve. It's actually just right out the window. I'm here at Key International Bank across from our Marriott property, and I can pretty much just see Holchan right out there. I was just there the other day and I was telling somebody the fish kind of just sit, and they're beautiful tropical fish. They kind of just sit in their school and you have to scuba around them. It's like they know they're protected. They are not moving for you, but you get so close and personal and get to see. We saw some shrimp. I saw some seahorses the other day, and some dolphins even came through. So pretty incredible. You never know what you're going to see here. I know every time you go out on the boat, you probably see something new.
and then I think one other one you'll show here is the kayaking. I mean, the beauty of the reef, which has many functions. It's got great scuba diving, it's got the great fishing and all that, but it's also big in protecting the island. People will always ask about storms and whatnot, and that reef does a great job of killing any kind of big waves that are coming in. So fun, recreational things like going kayaking. It's really peaceful. You're not just kayaking in like the ocean where there's 5-foot swells. It's very peaceful. You might get a windy day where there's a little bit more chop, but it allows for this. It allows for all various types of water activities. It's kind of like being on a lake, and then once you get past the reef, you're kind of in the deep blue. So it's kind of a nice difference there. So if you like to get out on the water, you don't have to worry about those big swells. So fun stuff. Highly recommend it when you're there. So yeah, Katie mentioned, since 2010, I mean, obviously during COVID years, things were very different, but, Belize has had a really great, almost like a hockey stick growth upwards. And we'll get into a little bit of the numbers in a slide or two, but yeah, it's, average annual tourism growth rate is around 15%. So really quite strong numbers there. And, if you really like numbers, if numbers is something you like, Belize has a tourism board. They have their own website where they aggregate all this data. So this is just like a vomit of data here, but you can really see, the high season, January, February, March, kind of on the left side of those charts, and how tourism does dip down kind of in the summer into the rainy season, but very strong numbers. And they break it down in many different categories. So whether you want to know, where the tourism coming in, you can see on the left chart, you have PGIA, which is the international airport. So you'll see the bulk of the tourism comes in through the airport. then they typically make their way out to the island, but you can see, where are they coming from? They're mostly coming from the US, North America in general. But it's interesting to look at those numbers so you can really get an idea of what's going on. So you at least have those numbers to kind of consult with when making decisions. This is another thing that is really fascinating to point out. If you see the tourism growing like crazy, Belize is not keeping up with the actual rooms available for that tourism. So, we're building our 202 room Marriott. That's a big property, but that's not going to make a dent in adding more rooms to the island, to the country. And so as the tourism grows, there's a bigger and bigger separation between the two, which I think, from an investor standpoint is going to be quite beneficial, because those folks need a place to stay. And there's almost not enough rooms for folks to be able to stay in places. So it's a great problem to have, but that's why we're doing what we're doing, and building some additional properties. So yeah, from a rental market perspective, if Airbnb is your thing, you can look at some of the comparison places. Ambergris Caye is really stellar with an A+ rating. Tulum is really beautiful, but not as high rating. So I think those are big things to consider if you're going to be doing some kind of property. Where is the market interested in? What ranks well? All those kind of things are always important to consider. And then this is, I mentioned a couple slides ago about comparisons. I mean, we're building a branded Marriott, which Katie will dive into the various opportunities there. But we're talking pricing starting in like the 300,000 range, where places like Bahamas, you'll see starting prices in the 500. Here's another property that's a 1-bed, 2 baths for almost $1 million. And that's just, it's unbelievable, the prices in the Bahamas. So as Belize continues to grow, it's only been a country for so long, there's a lot of opportunities coming there. But you're seeing that it's a much better value play than some of these other more established markets, which would be much higher on that investment curve we talked about earlier on. So just something to consider. But yeah, Belize is still a sweet spot, but it won't be forever. So just keep that in mind. But Katie, why don't you talk about some of the various opportunities?
Sure, absolutely. So we'll jump into compare. This is another comparison for pricing, just about half the price. But going back to that investment curve that Joe had talked about earlier, that's where you want to come in the market early. Like Mike said, put yourself in a little time machine. How far do you want to go back? 20, 30 years? If you're in that 20-year mark, then Belize might be a spot for you to look at. And like Joe was saying, we really do have, and I didn't see it too during high season, December, January, February into March. We sell out 6 months in advance sometimes for these hotels, and maybe a few of rooms that are left are either really expensive or maybe a hostel that you might not want to stay in. So we're trying to fill that gap, and that's what we're doing here. But really in the market, we have these branded hotels. So one of them is Best Western. And I'll do 2 comparisons, off-beach property versus an on-beach property and their price points. Here at the Best Western, this is what we're going to consider an off-beach property. It's 2 blocks from the beach, but it doesn't mean that you can't access the beach. Here on the island, or even in the whole country of Belize, the beach is all public access. So there's always a service road or a point where the government mandates that you have to access the beach, so everybody can walk on the beach and enjoy the beautiful waters. We call that Queensland. It's first 66 feet from the waterline in. So when you're staying here or owning at the Best Western, you can walk 2 blocks right over to the beach, where I am today. I'm just sitting just a few feet right here from the beachfront. And this is a much lower price point than maybe a luxury property. So for being 2 blocks from the beautiful water, you can start off at $147,900. That's a great buy-in to the properties and the market here on the island, especially for in town. So here on the island, our original town was called San Pedro Town. Now we have these other little areas that we're growing into. So you'll hear us refer to the whole island as Ambergris Caye, and then San Pedro is the town. We're find that that's where everything started developing, and that's where people want to be. That's where all the shops, the restaurants, the grocery stores are. So when you're coming for your first visit, or maybe you don't want to rent a golf cart, you want to be able to walk to your destinations, a lot of folks are staying in town, and that's what makes this such an ideal location. So at the Best Western, we do have a lot of folks that live there full time, but this is a turnkey opportunity where you can rent it out long term, or you can rent it out short term. So if you want to come down and stay maybe, only a few weeks out of the year, there, rent it out when you're not. It'll pay for itself, and then you have a turnkey opportunity with a professional management company on site. They'll do everything for you, all the marketing, they do the invoicing, you'll get your monthly statements, and then your proceeds we paid out quarterly for any rental proceeds. So this property here, I don't have a slide that shows it, but we can send it over in our email after the webinar. We have a new building called Galleon. It only has 10 residences remaining in the building, so it's almost sold out. We are gearing to open in September. So that one's a great opportunity. Once the building's open, if there are any residences remaining, we can expect to see the prices increase. So with that, you do know you have a little bit of built-in appreciation before completion. And then I'm going to jump over and talk about an on-beach property. So this one's the Marriott Residences. It's a name we know so well. It's the #1 hotel chain in the world. So going back to all those numbers we discussed, why Belize and what is bringing folks here, major branded hotels have already been following the trends, just like the major US airlines bringing those nonstop flights. Then we see these branded hotels follow suit. They see that increase in tourism numbers, and they know it's not slowing down. It's only going to continue picking up. So now we have branded hotels jumping in to benefit and bring us some more places to stay, because we know there's definitely a gap in the market. So right here, you can see the beginning of the Marriott Residences. I'm actually just right across the street from the property right now. It doesn't look like this any longer, but this is originally where we started off. And then this is what we'll end up with over here on the right-hand side. So right now we're under construction. We have all of our steel framing up, and we are starting to see walls go up on our north tower. But the whole resort will face out to the Caribbean Ocean. Most of these residences are going to have that direct ocean view. I think there's only one little courtyard studio that faces into the courtyard. Everything else is direct, beautiful, unobstructed Caribbean views. And like Joe was saying, this reef runs parallel. You can see it right outside your front window. So today it is a little bit breezier, so we got some of those big white caps, which is so beautiful. But that's really where we get our waves. We don't have those big crashing waves that come in. We just watch it hit the reef, but that really does protect this island. So here is more pictures of the Marriott going under construction. I know one thing that was pretty impressive to me was watching this stage right here. There's over 300 pilings. So this is the largest beachfront resort, or actually the largest single standing resort on the island. It's all 202 keys, all under one roof. So there's over 300 pilings that had to go into the ground here, and these were done one by one. Pretty impressive feat to watch, but this was the early stages. And as you see here, now we're getting our north tower. This is our south tower. And then I have this one. This was taken earlier this year. I probably should have thrown a fresh one in there, but this was taken earlier this year. You can see over here, this is the north tower over to the left-hand side. This is where the walls are starting to go up. The middle section right here is going to be where you enter in for the lobby area. We have 2 pools on site. One of them is right here in front of us, and this is our south tower. So you can see it's a pretty expansive property. It's kind of hard to get everything in one slide, but it gives a lot of opportunities for folks to invest. There's 12 different floor plans to choose from. I'm not going to go into all 12 of them right here on the webinar. We'll definitely run out of time, but I do like to mention to folks, get a hold of your property consultant, let them know you're interested in, and most importantly, let them know your goals. The more that you can share with us, the more that we can guide you and give you direction on something that kind of makes sense for you and your investments. So again, right here, this is the pretty good view of the whole build out. It's going to be a beautiful, that Spanish colonial style. So really holding true to the island and the original development here. And as you can see right here, we also have a little over the water palapa, which is going to be a restaurant and bar, and then there's going to be a dive shop. So again, being beachfront, you can go out on your tours that you want to go to Holchan, Shark Ray Alley, do your diving, snorkeling. You can get picked up right outside of the hotel. So just a few steps away. Very convenient for folks. And we're seeing this too, where there's a change in the tourism. Joe was mentioning a lot of the snorkeling and diving, and a long time ago, it was really just a fishing village before that. And then we started having some of the tourism trickle in for the snorkeling and diving and fishing. And now we're seeing a lot of mainstream travelers where it's 3 generations. It's grandma and grandpa that are bringing down the grandkids. And so maybe they don't all want to go out and go fishing, but they can sit and enjoy this beautiful beachfront resort and have all the amenities they need. There's the spa, multiple restaurants. That's one thing I always tell folks, when I go over the restaurants. You definitely won't go hungry at this location. On site, there's 2 restaurants. There's one right here on the beachfront, and then just behind the restaurant, there's actually 2 other little restaurants, little corner stores too. So definitely won't go hungry, and a little bit of something for the whole family to enjoy when everybody comes down together in that group. I think this property, what impresses me and I'm really excited for, something that the island truly needs, is a conference center. We have a lot of these smaller little mom and pop shops that have been running for years, maybe 10, 20 rooms. But when we have a dive conference, we can't really even house everybody under one roof. So this resort is kind of solving that problem for us. We have not only the conference center, but a breakout room. So you can have vendors and then their own catering, which will also kind of pick up on where I think the island is going to next, is one of those destinations for weddings. So that's another thing that I'm starting to see trickle in as things change here on the island. There's 2 wedding gazebos here at the Marriott as well. So having that large space and then the 2 wedding gazebos, I do foresee that we're going to have a lot of large parties here at the property. So this is our interior design, just give you some ideas. Now, like I said, when you reach out and speak with your property consultant, we have a few other renderings we can share, but for the sake of time on our webinar, I'll just click through a few of them real quick. This is the front entrance right here. As I mentioned, there's 2 pools here on site. One of them is adult only pool and one of them is family friendly, which is ideal for those groups that are coming down for the honeymoon or the wedding, versus, people that are coming down with their grandkids. So there's both sides of the resort, something for everybody. And then in this slide up, or I'm sorry, this little window up here on the top right, you can see an example of one of the rooms. So depending on the room that you're looking for, let us know and we'll send you over the renderings. So for starting off at $349.9, it's a really easy buy into the market. So again, off beach prices are starting around $147.9, and then on beach for $349.9, a really good buy-in. I know in comparison to what we just saw for the Bahamas, this is incredible. It's a fraction of the price for the same beautiful blue Caribbean waters. And then your pathway to ownership, we do have a lot of opportunities. Something that's truly unique to ECI development is that you can fund in crypto. So I know that crypto is kind of coming back. The numbers are doing pretty good. I've seen and watching them myself. So now's a great time to be able to leverage that crypto into something as a hard asset to help hedge against that inflation. You can also title and fund with your SDIRA, which I know is unique to Belize. There's only a couple other countries in Central America where you can do that. We also have financing available. So up to 80% financing through Key International Bank, which is where I am today. And we can send you over all the details, again, depending on what your interests are. But I will say, I know here in Belize, financing is difficult to find. So I know in the US, it's really easy. We can walk into a bank, maybe walk out a few hours later and have that loan 20% down and a 30-year mortgage. And that's just not the case in reality here in Belize. It's really difficult to find through a local bank. So we were able to solve that problem through Key International Bank, and we offer that 80% financing. And another great opportunity, especially with the Marriott, I think this is going to be the ideal investment for getting your residency through the investor program. So here in Belize, there's a few different routes you can go through for your residency, but one of the great ones is the investor residency. So for a $250,000 investment into real estate, you can qualify for residency, and then you can add dependents on there as well. So you'll become a permanent resident in Belize. After 5 years of being a permanent resident, then you qualify to apply for citizenship. So it's a great passport to have, it gives you a lot of flexibility throughout Central America and the Caribbean. And we're getting here towards the end, but I wanted to offer this resource to everybody. The Belize Handbook really is great. It kind of dives more into Belize with the tourism, what to wear, where to go, and religion, language, and just a little bit of everything. There's a lot of detailed information. I know that we couldn't cover everything today on a Belize 101 webinar, but this is just a webinar to kind of touch base, get folks interested, and then dive in from there to find the spot for you. So here at info@ecidevelopment.com, let us know if you want a copy of this Belize Handbook. We'll be happy to send it over to you. And then we're going to jump into the Q&A section. So I'll have Joe dive in. I also want to share this email real quick as well, webinar@ecidevelopment.com. If there's a question that we don't get answered, I know we'll have about 20 minutes left. So if we don't get to it, or sometimes if you're an anonymous attendee, we won't be able to reach out to you directly. This is an email address you can send all those questions to, or maybe something pops up after the webinar. But we'll have Joe dive into our Q&A section.
Yeah, sure. And folks will probably watch some of the recordings, months from now. So if you're in that camp, yeah, just let us know. We can certainly get those questions answered for you. So just a reminder, if anyone joined kind of after we started, feel free to put in the Q&A section below. We will get those answered. That's kind of the easiest way to go about this. Katie, there is a question about beaches, and maybe you can address kind of what the beaches will look like. Well, just in general, but maybe also in front of the Marriott. Since that's a beachfront property.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So as we were mentioning, we have the reef that runs parallel to the island. So I always like to remind folks that reef protects us, but we don't get those big crashing waves that are going to come in and break up that bedrock into a lot of beaches. So we do along the reef side, we do have a lot of beautiful resorts where we have pools. You look out into the beach, and you can usually jump off of the piers, but this is not a stretch of the island where you're going to be having those soft sandy beaches that you walk into. And truly, Belize is not one of those destinations like a Hawaii or, the Maldives. We can't really compare those, comparing apples to oranges, again, because we have the reef. So the reef is really for the diving, the snorkeling. But the great thing is we do have other locations in the island where you have those soft sandy beaches. Place like Secret Beach, where is our destination. I usually go there every weekend to go swimming. I also like to remind folks too, when we have our front of the island, you always want to have safety in mind when you're here swimming. It's a new place for you. So I always recommend not swimming past the pier or going to a place like Secret Beach where you are in an area that's designated for swimming. But here at the Marriott, we're going to have 2 pools right there on the beach, also all of our lounge chairs, and then a pier that you can jump off of.
Thank you for that, Katie. And I see another question, kind of generic. Do you hear people having and expressing interest in the south of Belize? I know we're obviously talking about kind of what we've got going on in Ambergris Caye, but what do you hear about the south of Belize? Do you go there, Katie? What do you see about that?
Yeah, so on the mainland and the southern region, that's probably the least touristed visited area. I do own property down there just because I know that's where I'm going to retire. I own property here on the island, but definitely the southern side of the country is more for ecotourism. There's not a lot going on right now, but I do foresee that changing in the future. I know that we're going to have some opportunities coming up as well, but the smaller farmettes that we have discussed, where it's the 1 to 2 acre properties that you can invest in, we'll be able to get more information out. I know we're getting close to having some details to share. That's going to be down by Punta Gorda or the Independence area. Again, those are going to be small little farmettes for folks that want to be able to have their own garden, live off of the earth a little bit more, and have a smaller footprint, but have a lot of space to be able to have, their home.
Sure. I see a couple questions about replay. Yes, this is being recorded, so we will put the replay together with a follow-up email with the handbook and maybe some other resources for folks. So if you've missed this, or if you said, wow, this is revolutionary and I got to share this with my friends and family, we're more than welcome to do so, but you will get that link.
Well, I'll also say real quick, anybody that might be interested in the smaller farmettes on the mainland in that southern region, reach out to us and just let us know that you're interested. So that way we can make a note and send those details over as soon as they're available.
Great. Couple questions about the Marriott. So the person is asking, is it primarily a resort / investment property, or is it suited for full-time residences? Are the units furnished, or do they come furnished? Any restrictions? So maybe we'll just kind of start with the first one and go into the other ones.
Sure. Yeah, so this property, being a Marriott, as you know, is a hotel chain, it's a brand. So that is their goal, is to run it as a resort. You can live here full-time if you want to live in a resort setting. That's, up to you and what your goals are. You're probably going to want a full kitchen. So with that, just make sure you let your property consultant know that your goal is more lifestyle versus investment. So that way we can make those recommendations on what residence is best for you. There is a turnkey opportunity. So if you do want to rent it out, you have your property manager on site. If you're going to live here, I'm sure there are going to be some regulations where you have to maintain it according to the same standards as the resort, because it is a Marriott hotel. What was the next question? I think I forgot the last one.
Just the furnishings, but that ties into that aspect. If you want to be in the rental program, it does have to be furnished to the rental management companies likings. We are not operating. So while this is kind of our property, it is run by a Marriott approved rental management company called Highgate. So they have to be the ones that approve. Frequent question I'm sure Katie and I get, and I'm sure Katie gets as well, as folks ask about going in and out of the rental program. Certainly is doable. There's, I think, 120 days notice. Just give us that heads up, either way. And then if you're going into the program, it will need to be inspected just in case you've decided to paint your walls purple or whatever, to make sure that it's a very standard Marriott experience through and through, whether it's, our property, your property, my property, Katie's property, any of that kind of stuff. So I think that's important to note, for certainly someone, if you're interested in that property, let us know. We can send you some templates of various paperwork just so you can look it over, see those kind of nuts and bolts, if that's of interest, but just let us
Yeah,
know.
and we have that great new FAQ guide that you mentioned to me earlier, Joe. So I
Yep.
think if folks are interested in the Marriott, again, just make a little note, let us know, let your property consultant know, so we can send that over to you in our follow-up email.
Yes. Let's see. The question, yes, hurricanes certainly is something, Katie, actually, you showed a great photo early on, over at Caye, but that actually was historically, from a hurricane. It's not often, I mean, it is in the hurricane belt. And so your options are to, understand that and build to code, and to, the kind of Miami-Dade hurricane codes, which is concrete, steel, all that kind of good stuff. Or, build it a little bit less expensive and build it out of wood, which is not going to hold up against that. So, but in the history of Belize, I think there's maybe been 2, 3, maybe, that have been, sizable, whereas you'll get like kind of the tail end of a Cat 1 or a heavier rainstorm. All it does is, knock down some branches and whatnot. But when you build out of concrete and stuff like that, that's what you do. You see that this can happen, and you build to it to make sure that it doesn't affect you. That is, part of the HOA, for the Marriott specifically, that HOA goes towards that. So if something ever crazy happened, you do have that. So it would, it would get rebuilt, but yes, that does exist. Anything you wanted to touch on that, Katie?
I think that's it. I mean, I would say too, with the current standards of building here on the island, things have really changed. So everything really now is built to the Category 4 hurricane standards. A lot of the windows are being shipped in from Florida, like you mentioned, versus, years ago, like back in the 60s when we did have a big hurricane, those were all wooden structures. So nowadays we don't really have that much we're worried about. Again, that reef, I know I keep hitting home on that. It does protect this island. We don't have huge storm surges. I was talking with one of the local residents, and they said the highest storm surge that we've seen on the island is 3 feet. And that's because those waves hit the reef first, and then we get what trickles after. So we're very well protected. We're blessed here in Belize.
Yes, and let me see. Someone was surprised to hear that there's financing. Yes, Key Bank has been around basically since the inception of ECI. So they do a lot in the region, not just Belize, but they do finance the properties in Belize. It's an international bank. So, you can do financing. They have some other cool programs like a gold to loan program. They also you can hold many different currencies in your account. So if you want to get some diversification in currencies, if that's the kind of investments you like to make, or just want to hold it, outside of the US dollar, there's some cool stuff there. So we can get you connected with their team as well, if, that's something of interest. There's questions about ROI. We can't really get into ROI. Marriott does not allow us to get into those details, but we do have some numbers that we have in our one document we can send that just are generic to the island, but they'll give you kind of a good idea in that regard. But we're not specifically allowed to throw out numbers.
Yeah, I will mention though, just the average for the island, just to compare to branded hotels, not saying that, this is numbers directly from Marriott, but the average in the island is about a 4 to 6% return. So not including furniture package or closing costs, but what you paid for the property, you typically will see most properties are offering 4 to 6%. But with a branded hotel, you can assume that would be higher. I actually just looked at the number of Bonvoy members. I remember when I looked just 2 years ago, it was at 169 million, and we're at 199 million Bonvoy members. So the marketing for Marriott is unmatched. So you can expect them to be at the higher end and beat the average for the island.
And if you think back to the data that I talked about, that the Belize Tourism Board puts together, you saw how that curve kind of started to dip when you got into summers, into the rainy season. And, by having a big conference space, you can, in the low season, do these big promos, Marriott can promo, some diving convention or whatnot. And now all of a sudden you go from, 20, 30% occupancy to 70, 90, whatever it may be. So I think that's the power of working with the brand. It's an important part. Sure, there's a premium for a project like a Marriott, but I think you get that. But you'll have a better idea with that document. Someone asked about the contract length for Marriott. I don't remember exactly. I want to say it's 30 years, but it is some defined long distance time period. As long as you meet the criteria, you can extend that. So, but yes, it won't just be a couple year project. It'll be very long under Marriott. And then we can renew that. So,
Yeah, and I know it has to be managed by a Marriott preferred provider because this is a hard branded Marriott. So
right.
you can't just pull anybody in. It has to be somebody they prefer or recommend. That's why we went with Highgate Hospitality. They were recommended because of their experience in the Caribbean. I know our contract with Highgate is 10 years. So then at the end of 10 years, sign on, but it will always have to be managed by Marriott or a preferred provider.
Yeah, and the group that's doing ours is a boutique company. I think they have headquarters in New York, but they specialize in Central America. So you certainly want someone that specializes in the region just because there's a lot of nuances. It's not like even though everyone always talks about like acai and stuff like that, like you're not seeing that in Belize. So you do need someone who's familiar with the region that understands, what's commonplace, what's not, what's doable, what's not. So you certainly want someone with a great expertise in that regard. Katie, maybe you can dive into this. Someone asks, I visit Ambergris Caye often. Where exactly is the property? Maybe you could give some more descriptors.
Sure. So we're just a little bit south of town. So I know when we talked about north and south, we were going by the bridge. So we refer to, we're just about 2 miles south of town, 2.5 miles south of the bridge. So if you've been coming here for a while, you might remember, I don't know how far back it goes to your visiting, but there used to be Exotic Key Resort, which was on the beachfront next to Crazy Canucks. So those two, the Exotic Key Resort was dismantled to make way, and then Crazy Canucks actually just moved their little over the water plapa on the same property. So that's where it originally was. We're just down by the yacht club. So you can look that up on the map, and it is updated on Google Maps. If you type in Marriott Residences, it will come up for you.
Awesome. Someone's asking about HOAs. To just touch on that, we can certainly in the follow-up send some brochures just so you can see the various availabilities and what that looked like. But I think they start around 300 some dollars for the Marriott and go up to 1,000 depending on what size and what floor you're on. At the Best Western, you remember Katie, like 100 and
It starts off at 175 for the smaller studios at Best Western. So again, much different price points. I think with the Marriott too, it goes by room. So if you're looking at something like a 2-bedroom, that's actually going to be a studio and a 1-bedroom that's adjoined to make the 2-bedroom. So that HOA will go per room and it goes based off of size. So again, 12 different floor plans to choose from. We'll dive in more on a personal basis after the Zoom to send over the information based off your interest.
Great. One other question I see, can you just kind of, you've been living there, Katie. You've probably been very involved in the community. Can you just talk a little bit about the expat community and kind of what that life's like there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I actually, so here on the island, and I think what people love about Belize is that we do have a lot of expats, but when you go out, you're really immersed in the culture and with the locals as well. So you'll find these groups of expats. We do a lot of like trivia nights where we meet up for lunch or, go to one place on a Tuesday to meet up. But really when you're out, it's not like Mexico. It's not like the all-inclusive resort where you're going to be on a resort and you're kind of just stuck there, you're trapped and you're just around a bunch of other expats or tourists. So here, when you're out and about, you're going to be really immersed in everything. I think this is one of the larger expat communities, but you'll find expats kind of throughout the whole country. I think this is a great starting point. More so when we were looking at the Best Western and Marriott, I think these are actually, well, I take that back. I'll go back to Best Western. It's a really easy buy-in for getting into the market. So we do find out that's a huge expat community. When I go over there, we do have a lot of the expats that start off there and then branch out as they get more familiar with the island and locations. So when you're here on the island, there's always something to do. Like I said, we have these groups that get together. I know that they have trivia night, and we also have crab races, which is Tuesday night. So tonight, if you're here on the island, they have crab races going on. And then they also have the chicken drop. So these are just little fun events that happen every week, and you get your expats together. But when you come here, I know that when you go out, you're going to be talking to people. And that is one of the best things to do. You're going to hear stories. And I know over and over again, you're going to meet people where it's not their first visit here. It's one of those truly unique places where you're going to hear somebody say, I come here every year on my anniversary. This is my 12th visit here. Oh, I was just here 3 months ago and I bought my next ticket back. It happens just like that. And I have to chuckle to myself because I was one of those. I came, I was here, I fell in love with the place, and I was back 3 months later. So I guess if you are already in love with Belize, maybe you just buy a one-way ticket because you can stay.
Yeah, Katie, I think, I don't see a question about this, but that brings up a really good logistic question for folks. If I get on a plane and come down tomorrow, you get to the Belize airport, they stamp you for 30 days. That's what your tourist visa is. So how do you go about that? I mean, we talked about the investor, visa for 250,000. That's obviously something someone can work on. But if I just came down tomorrow, how could I realistically, or how can someone stay? What's that process like?
Yeah, great question. No, that's a great question. So like Joe said, you do get your 30-day visa when you come in. Here on the island, it's really easy to renew. So you can renew your visitor visa every 30 days. We have our immigration office. You just take your passport, you fill out a really easy form, let them know you're staying, and then they'll give you another stamp. So it's $100 or 200 Belize every 30 days to renew. If you know that you're going to stay here a little bit longer, I always recommend asking them, hey, can you give me 2 months? They usually will. I haven't heard anybody tell me that they've been denied. It's not written into law that they have to give you extra months, but really the immigration office knows this is a destination where a lot of folks are coming to stay, or maybe even just be a snowbird for 3 months. So instead of going in every month, they'll give you that little extension. So you can continue to do that. Again, there's many routes to go for residency, but anywhere that you are in the country, not just here on the island, there's an immigration office where it's really easy to go. We have 7 main offices, 7 main districts where you can go in and renew.
Or if you want, Mexico's not far off. You can go there. You can go to Guatemala. By doing that, you'll stamp basically out of the country, get into Guatemala or get into Mexico. And then from there, you come back to Belize and you would re-up that 30 days. So a couple options there, just depending on what interests you. I see a question asking about Belize ownership, meaning kind of first dibs on rentals elsewhere. I mean, we do projects all throughout Central America. So certainly for any kind of owners or shareholders within the company, we do promos. Those people will hear about it first, so they can get on that opportunity as well. But yeah, today's kind of Belize centric, so we'll just stick to Belize on that regard. But I just wanted to address that.
We only have a few minutes left, so if anybody has some last minute questions, I also want to just mention again real quick, if anything pops up afterwards, this email address right here, webinar@ecidevelopment.com, please send those follow-up questions as they come in, or if you think of them. And we probably got about 3 minutes left, Joe.
Sorry, I'm just scanning to see.
Yeah, and if there are questions we didn't get to, we will be able to follow up afterwards. I can't see the Q&A section right now, so I always like to remind people, if you are an anonymous attendee, we won't be able to reach out to you, so you will have to send your questions to the webinar at ecidevelopment.com.
Katie, I think one other thing we didn't touch upon, I think would be good to address, is just discovery tours. When's a good time to come down? Like that kind of process. If someone says, hey, this is all great stuff, I'm ready to take a trip. What would you advise for folks there?
Sure. We don't have a planned date for our next upcoming Belize Discovery Tour, but we'll be able to send those out to anybody who's interested in Belize and let you know when those dates are coming up. But great news is you don't have to come to a Discovery Tour. Belize is English speaking, like we mentioned in the webinar, so it's always easy to come, get here on your own. And I live here on the island, so I'm always happy to meet up, show you around town, and obviously take you to the properties. Just give me a heads up so you can let your property consultant know when you plan on coming to Belize. They'll loop me in. We can make recommendations for places to stay, places to eat, how to get a golf cart. And that's going to be really easy. One time of the year, well, actually, there's a couple times that I really love, but coming up in July 1st is the opening of our lobster season. So we have seasons for our lobster and our conch. So July 1st, it'll open. We have our Lobster Fest. That will go through July 1st through 12th. The 12th is going to be a great weekend to be here because that's when they kind of do the kickoff and it's a big block party. So always a great time to come. You can always try a lot of different restaurants because they'll have the little bite size at the block party. So you can try a lot of restaurants, little bite size lobsters. And then the other time that you had mentioned before, Joe, is in September. So September is going to be more of local tourism, but we still have, some of the international tourists trickling in. And what you're going to see is a lot of celebration for Battle of St. George's Key Day and the Independence. So coming anytime between that September 10th and 21st, there's going to be lots of pop-up parades. Belizeans love to celebrate. They celebrate everything. There are a lot of holidays, and so you will definitely see a lot of that in the culture here. Do expect to have a little bit of rain in September, but again, we're here in the tropics. So our rain is a quick Passover and it's a warm rain. So it doesn't stop us from doing anything.
Sure beats snow, but
Yeah.
I see we're at the top of the hour here. So just to be punctual and on time, I see there's some questions we didn't get to, but we will be in touch for those of you who we didn't get those answers to, and be in contact here. But yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. I hope you learned something. Hope you enjoyed it. And Katie, any last words you want to?
No, we're just happy to help. So if any more questions pop in later, just reach out to us. We're always here for you. I know I get excited about talking about Belize. I could ramble on forever, but this really was surface level. It's truly a Belize 101. So please let me, Joe, or any of your property consultants know what your goals are, and we're the true experts here to help you.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone again. Appreciate it. And like I said, we'll send out the recording here shortly. So if there's anything you want to check back in or share it with anyone, happy to let you do that. But yes, thanks again for attending, and we'll see you on our next webinar.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.